and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to a special edition of Consider This, where we want you to consider and then reconsider the news of the day, including what you know of the current political situation and what it means for us. Now, over the next 60 minutes or so, we will be speaking to activists, politicians and experts to make sense of today's developments. Now, today has been particularly interesting. We had the Yang di-Pertuan Agong ending the second day of interviewing MPs to determine who commands the majority in Dewan Rakyat. We also had Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad's first public address since this political turmoil began 4 days ago. We also heard from Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim confirming that Pakatan Harapan has nominated him as the next Prime Minister instead of Dr. Mahathir. Now, that's a lot to process for the day, a lot to consider and reconsider. And to help us do it, we have joining us on the line Professor James Chin, Director of the Asia Institute from the University of Tasmania in Australia. Welcome, James, to the show. Thanks for joining us today. Now, let's begin with Gabungan Parti Sarawak, or GPS, and its 18 members in Dewan Rakyat. So how they leverage or not their potentially pivotal political strength will now have national ramifications as never before. And there have been subtle shifts on the question of who GPS supports. So James, what's your sense of the latest statement? Does GPS support Tun Dr. Mahathir, or is it whomever the Agong chooses?
Right, so the latest statement coming out of GPS is that they will follow the advice of the Agong and they'll probably go with whoever the Agong selects. But they haven't also decided really who they will support. My understanding is that if the chips are down, they'll probably choose Mahathir. But at the present moment, for both Warisan and GPS, I think it's a wait-and-see attitude.
So what do you think is going through the minds of political leaders in Sarawak, James? I mean, what would be the considerations for them?
So the way it works in Sabah and Sarawak is that essentially they always try to go with whoever is in power. Initially, you can see very strong statements from both GPS and Warisan that they'll go with Dr. Mahathir, because from Sunday to Monday, it was quite clear that Mahathir had the support from both sides, so it was very clear that he will carry on as the Prime Minister. So they quickly also jumped to Mahathir's bandwagon. When the thing became a bit more complicated, I think they sort of pulled back and decided that the best thing to do is sort of wait for the dust to settle. It is quite clear that they prefer Mahathir, both Warisan and GPS prefer Mahathir, but they're not very sure which way the wind is blowing.
Okay, so if they're going to sit back and kind of wait till they get more clarity on this, I'm wondering, you know, if this means, what this would mean for the leverage that GPS will have. How much leverage would they have if they say they support either contender and they're going to wait for Agong's pick? How much leverage then does GPS really have in pushing its more Sarawak-based agenda?
It's not a question of leverage. With horse trading, basically, you go around counting the numbers. So it is my understanding that initially they get to support the Mahathir. So you have to work on the assumption that when Mahathir starts doing the numbers, in terms of numbers game, he will count the GPS and the Warisan as part of his numbers. I'm not sure that Anwar will count GPS and Warisan. I'm sure he has made overtures to them. But I think because the thing is so fluid right now, I think the leaders of both Sabah and Sarawak are sort of sitting in the middle, trying to find out who has upper hand, and that's the reason why they've been coming up with neutral statements saying that they will wait for the Agong. I think the important thing to remember is that Sabah and Sarawak counts for about 66, so they are sort of a crucial pact in the sense that if you can get a majority on the peninsula side, Sabah and Sharaad will really help you get a 2/3 majority.
What about the question of the different visions that now the two main contenders have about the future of Malaysia? Dr. Mahathir saying he wants to put aside political parties, he wants the ability to choose his own technocratic or merit-based or non-partisan cabinet versus the Pakatan, much more kind of conventional parliamentary mode in terms of putting a government together. Do you think that will make a difference in terms of how the chips will fall?
I think you're giving too much credit to the politicians in Sabah and Sarawak. I think they look at it purely from the perspective of power play. All those things are really not that important. I think what is important is that who's going to be the Prime Minister, what is the shape of the majority, and what can Sabah and Sarawak get out of this new relationship. I don't think they worry about things like whether it will be a unity government, whether it will be a coalition-style government. What they really want to know is clarity. They want to know who's going to be in charge.
Okay, but let's say they go with Anwar Ibrahim and the Pakatan Harapan. Will this produce problems for the Sarawak GPS because of the existence of Sarawak-based Pakatan parties? How will GPS support the federal government at the same time be in opposition with their rivals?
No, what will happen is that if, for example, Anwar is successful and GPS, they probably will not join Pakatan, but they'll do some sort of deal similar to Warisan. They'll just become an ally of Pakatan. If that were to happen, essentially it means that there will be status quo in Sarawak. GPS will carry on ruling in Sarawak, and there won't be a real contest in the next state election.
And how do you think, James, that all of this could impact the upcoming state elections in Sarawak?
So as I mentioned, if Anwar or Mahathir becomes Prime Minister and GPS decided to support either one, what will happen in Sarawak is that you basically have a status quo. So if GPS becomes a formal member of the ruling party, then it's obvious that, if it is a PH government, then there's no opposition in Sarawak. If it is not a PH government, then probably PH will fight the GPS as part of the federal government.
James, I mean, we move away from political leaders and the kind of considerations they have. What about, what do you know of Sarawakians themselves or Sabahans when they watch this contest, this present crisis? Is it something they feel strongly about, or do they see it as a kind of drama happening from the other side of the South China Sea?
Essentially, for the ordinary person in Sabah and Sarawak, they don't really care about this. What they care is that they want the state governments to use this as a leverage to get more out of Malaya. In other words, they want to use this as a leverage to get the maximum concessions under the Malaysia Agreement and also for some other stuff as well. So essentially, they see this as a power play between the political parties in the Peninsula Malaysia, and it's got nothing to do with Sabah and Sarawak.
Okay, on that note, James, what kind of concessions, what kind of maximum concessions could Sarawakian parties likely push for in the short term? Could we be looking at perhaps a Deputy Prime Minister position being asked for?
Sure. I mean, everything is on the table. But as I said, because the situation is so fluid, I don't think this sort of thing will be discussed. It's more like, you come and join me. If I'm successful, then we'll talk, rather than laying out in details exactly what I'll be getting.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight, James. Really appreciate you sharing your insights. Right now things are very fluid, but we'll probably check back in with you once we know a little bit more about what's happening in terms of the numbers and Agong's pick and his decision. Thank you for joining us on the line, James. We're going to take a quick break and be back with more on Consider This, so stay tuned.
Hi,
Sharaad.
Can you see? You can't see. Okay.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Okay. Thanks for staying with us on this special edition of Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you this evening. Interim Prime Minister Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad gave his first public address since the political turmoil began some 4 days ago now. He confirmed today that he is seeking to form a unity government of individuals who will set aside party politics and ideology. And not an hour later, we also heard from Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, who confirmed that Pakatan Harapan has nominated him as the next Prime Minister instead of Dr. Mahathir. To help us make sense of these two speeches, we have joining us on the line, Skype right now, we have Zurairi, AR journalist from the Malay Mail online. Zurairi, thank you for joining us this evening. What were your major takeaways from Mahathir and Anwar's speeches? I mean, what stood out for you in terms of similarities and differences?
I think there are more differences than there was any similarities. For example, I think for Dr. Mahathir, you could see how wary he was, and I guess how apologetic he was, because he feels he seemed to feel that the country sort of blamed him for everything. So we saw him apologizing once at the beginning of his address, and again right towards the end, where in comparison for Pakatan Harapan, it was actually quite brief when compared to their previous statements. I think they were trying to keep any collateral damage low, and it was such a it's quite short for a very anticipated press conference, because I think the press has been waiting for Datuk Sri Anwar to say some words around 2:30, and then we were informed that there was a press conference going to be held at 4:30, but it was not until around 6 that we finally heard from Pakatan Harapan and him.
Zurairi, while Dr. Mahathir might have felt or might feel that the public has projected its anger or disappointment onto him, he clearly has projected his anger and disappointment on the political class. I mean, he goes on to say that, you know, orang politik dan parti politik terlalu utama politik sehingga lupa negara. And that is an extraordinary charge to lay at the feet of politicians. What do you make of that charge?
Yeah, I think you could see that he was very angry. Either he was acting it out, or perhaps he was really angry. We could never know. But from what we could hear from his immediate address was that he was very angry, and he directed his fury towards very specific parties and persons. He only mentioned his own party, Bersatu, and UMNO, and PAS. So there was no mention at all of the rogue MPs from PKR or even you know, any other parties. It's purely focused and directed towards these three parties. So I guess he might have been genuinely angry with all the political maneuvering that sort of like sidestepped his authority, which then we saw him resulting in him resigning as chairman of Bersatu.
So just on that note, Zurairi, I mean, you know, talking about, you know, these politicians who have prioritized politics, and Tun Dr. Mahathir saying, well, he's calling for politics to be put aside for the moment. Could that be read as Tun asking for a free hand?
Yeah, I think whatever has happened in the past few days, he has always been towards this issue, you know, whether he would have a free hand, free reign, that everything, whether when he would step down, it should be in his hands rather than being determined by any of his allies. And I think that was what exactly has led into this situation right now. So when we see that the kind of suggestion or proposal that he has since now bring public, before this it was all just speculation, you could see that what he has proposed, a unity government, would essentially give him the free rein that he has always wanted. And it is now up to us, the public, whether we want it, I guess.
And that, on that point, I mean, what do you think the public wants? I mean, this is a call for, and it seems on one level, pretty undemocratic, though the proviso is that he has the best interests of the nation at heart at a time of great economic challenges. That's also in his speech. He's asking for, in some ways, a kind of undemocratic solution. What do you make of this idea of a national government, technocratic or merit-based? Do you think it holds water?
Yeah, I think whatever it is, the Dr. Mahathir that we are seeing right now, I think he is right now in the mode of, in Malay we call it orang tua merajuk, He's basically just fed up with everything. He just wants to leave a legacy. He literally does not have much longer. And I think what he is looking right now is to preserve that last legacy. So he wants whatever reforms that he has planned to be implemented. And he is not seeing that because I think, it's a mix of internal politics within Pakatan as well, and then also some of his reforms in Parliament that has been pushed forward by Pakatan Harapan has been stymied by the opposition. So I think that is essentially what he is looking right now. He wants free reign to run the country in his mold. Well, whether that is good or not for democracy, I think that calls for another discussion.
Okay, well, let's pivot and look at Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim's statement or comments. So his speech was careful to point out that as a result of Tun not attending the Pakatan Harapan Presidential Council, the existing parties then took the decision to support Anwar, whereas they had supported Tun just the day before. Zurairi, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much Pakatan Harapan giving up on not just Dr. Mahathir, but also Bersatu. I think all this while, because of coalition politics, they would have to, at least give time to Dr. Mahathir, and they believe that he would have given the reins over to Datuk Seri Anwar, which he might have had, but now we wouldn't know whether he would have when even. But I guess now we could see perhaps Pakatan Harapan just, they are trying now to focus on what their pledges and promises have been to the voters, and the pledge was that for a government led by Pakatan Harapan, for the Pakatan Harapan voters, and with the eventual eventually having Datuk Seri Anwar as Prime Minister. And I think from what we could read from the statement is that they did not think that they would ever get that if they had let Dr. Mahathir just went ahead with the unity government.
It's clear that in tone, the speeches are very different. Anwar's was very short and sharp and very matter of fact. There weren't emotional appeals as there was with the Tun's speech. But he did mention the reform agenda. Who do you think he was addressing? Was he addressing parliamentarians with the reform agenda, references, or do you think he was addressing the larger public?
I think whatever it is, his address just now would not, I think practically it would not have any effect on who gets to set a new government, because after all, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong has already heard from each MP. So he is not appealing for anyone to make any decision, but I think he was just coming clean to the public on what he wanted to do, what he wished to do, but what he cannot currently do because of the current political crisis. So I think indirectly he is addressing the public to tell, it is sort of like a confession, I want to do this, but I cannot. You can see that sort of like pleading, emotional. He is playing the old man role in his address for people to sort of like, have sympathy on what he is trying to do. And I think that's the crux of the message that he was trying to tell public just now.
Right. So I've been thinking, Zurairi, about what's been missing in the speeches, right? So, Sharaad pointed out that the reform agenda, that was missing, that was absent in Dr. Mahathir's speech. But in Anwar's speech, what was missing was talk of numbers. So Anwar was asked if he had the numbers, and he evaded the question, and he deferred to Agong. How are you reading this, that he did not outright state the numbers that he claims he has, or that we hear he has?
This has been weird for all sides, for all parties. I mean, you would have thought that, before embarking on this sort of like gambit, you would have at least secured the numbers of MPs that would have supported you. But I guess everyone was caught by surprise, and I think you could see by how Pakatan Harapan delayed their press conference first to hear what Dr. Mahathir has to say, and after that, in order to respond to that I think they would probably was not expecting Dr. Mahathir to come clean on this. So yeah, I think now we are left with both Pakatan Harapan and pro-Dr. Mahathir people, I think it must have been said by others before that right now we have three factions. Those who want Datuk Sri Anwar as Prime Minister, those that want Dr. Mahathir, and those who are calling for snap elections. Whether they would change their minds after this, that we will see that tomorrow. But I think...
I want to ask a quick question before we go to a break, which is the language that politicians are using. We heard the Muafakat Nasional politicians talk about a government of national unity, but in many ways, this is not what they were proposing. They were saying everybody but DAP, which is one of the largest parties in parliament. So are politicians misusing concepts? I mean, are they reinventing the language of politics just to suit their own agenda?
No, I think you are right, but I think it's partly they're just using this kind of language to further obfuscate the democratic process. You know, because for most of the voters, all these concepts of democracy and of votes and all elections and all that, it does not really hit them directly. So emotional pleas, playing on ethno-religious agenda, that strikes the chord directly, and I think that is what's happening right now.
Well, Zurari, thank you for joining us this evening, sharing those thoughts and insights. We're going to take a quick break. After this, we're going to hear from Fadia Nadwa Fikri, lawyer and pro-democracy activist. We'll be back with more on Consider This, so stay tuned.
Thinking about this country.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
So it's Fadia Nadwa Fikri.
Yep, that's correct.
When were you last here at Mike Show, right?
Yeah.
Which is what, a year ago?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh wow, has it been a year?
When we just began, remember? It was for an hour.
So more than a year ago.
Yeah.
Wow. Time passes very quickly.
I know, right? But some things don't change.
So, just a quick one. So yesterday, there were about 80 to 100 people, is that right?
Yeah, around 100, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Should I be looking at you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't look at the cameras, just look at us.
Okay. Look at the cameras and we'll just have a chat.
So, just be free yourself, and we'll...
Oh, shit.
Okay. You comfortable? What do you need to do?
Okay, all right.
Because the handle...
Handle is a bit...
Unless you lower her seat so she can move.
Tak boleh lower sangat.
Okay, all right.
Welcome back to this special edition of Consider This. I'm Melisa, Idris, with me Sharaad, Kuttan. Yesterday, there was a peaceful gathering of about 80 to 100 people, comprising representatives of NGOs, human rights activists, University Student Association leaders and members of the public. Now, this was a leaderless assembly and it was held to demand a clear answer on the ongoing political turmoil. Joining us on the show now to discuss this further, we have Fadia Nadwa Fikri, lawyer and activist. Fadia, welcome to the show. So, this demonstration was dubbed Demokrasi Mati Ayuh Turun ke Jalan, right? So, democracy is dead, let's go to the streets. Yeah. What led you to characterize this current crisis as a death of democracy, so to speak?
I think the betrayal that is happening is pretty real, and people feel that they're left out of the whole process. People in power, in positions of power, scheming and plotting without people knowing what's going on and what's going to happen to the reform agenda. People feel like we voted you in and now you're doing this to us, and also the thought of having the kleptocrats that are facing trials right now in court, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to drop the charges against them, for example? So what's going to happen in terms of race relations in this country? Are we going to be more and more racist? I think people are scared.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but you know, what about the fact that at this point in time, the Muafakat Nasional gambit is over? They no longer, PAS and UMNO no longer support Tun Dr. Mahathir. He's already stated several times now that he would not allow for UMNO to come back en bloc, or in fact, he would not accept UMNO and, you know, the whatever conditions might have been put forth as a way or condition for a kind of a unity government with them. So, I mean, isn't that issue already allayed, that there's no chance of the kleptocrats coming back?
Who's going to assure us that it's not going to happen? We don't even know what's going on now. A lot of people don't even understand what unity government means. No one is explaining that to the public. And also there are a lot of things that are kept secret, you know, the dealing and wheeling, everything is like going on without the public knowing. So I think the public has every right to be angry. The public has every right to think that the worst is going to happen, because in the first place, this should not have happened.
Okay, but let's ask ourselves the question about who this public is. I mean, you are an activist, you're particularly aware of politics and the personalities. There are a lot of people who aren't, right? I mean, what percentage of the population really is attentive to the kinds of issues that you are foregrounding? Aren't you a minority in this regard?
It's really hard to answer that question. I think as a citizen of this country, as a rakyat, I feel affected by what's going on. And when you talk to other people, when you talk to students, when you talk to the youth, for example, on social media, you can see people are having this kind of discussion and asking, what do we do? Yeah, we can't just let the political elite to determine the destiny of this country, and we have to do something about it. And yeah, I think we've learned a lot, you know, before GE14, and we don't want that to repeat.
And that's fair. So you mentioned a bit earlier, Fadhia, that there's a lot of fear, a lot of confusion surrounding everything that's happened in the last 4 days or so. How did the protest last night, and how are you personally helping provide more clarity and perhaps calming the situation down? Or is it the opposite? Do you want people to get riled up and upset?
I think I want people to be upset. I want people to have that anger translated into action, because it's about us. It's about the people. It's about the public. It's about the rakyat. Democracy, that's what democracy means, yeah? It's about trying to tell people that all source of power, all source of sovereignty must emanate from the people. But clearly what's going on now, politically, people are left out of the equation.
But isn't that also a part of the nature of representative democracy? It's not a daily plebiscite on what people should do or what government should do. It is, we have taken the decision to elect somebody as our representative, and we have to trust them for at least 5 years to make those decisions. I mean, isn't that just the nature of representative democracy?
But in the interest of the people, but not in the interest of the political elite. Yeah. So what about the people now?
Okay, I want to ask you this. You know, it sounds, strangely enough, very similar to what Dr. Mahathir is arguing. He's saying the political elites have run away with politics, and therefore he wants now a chance to form a government that's apolitical. I mean, in fact, that's how it's framed in many media reports. He wants either merit-based political, order or cabinet at least. And so, do you agree with him? And do you think that Dr. Mahathir, forming this non-party political-based cabinet will solve the problem?
Does that mean he didn't believe in the reform agenda?
What do you think?
I'm throwing that question to him, actually. When you said that, what happened after GE14 is no longer relevant now we have to change the whole thing, what are you telling us? You know, we voted you in because we wanted you to carry out certain things that we wanted as a rakyat. But now you're saying something different, and we don't even understand, what certain things mean.
Is it a zero-sum game? I mean, can you have a so-called unity government and still pursue the reform agenda? Can that still be the number one thing?
They would have to assure us that they can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, because of the betrayal, I think people feel betrayed.
It's the trust deficit.
Yes, exactly. They've not addressed that part. Why did the political elite even allow this to happen in the first place? No one explains anything to
Okay,
the
let's
public.
put it this way. I mean, it wasn't, as far as we know, the narrative is very clear. It wasn't Tun that precipitated this crisis. It was in fact, individuals within PKR, the bastion of the reform agenda, that precipitated this. I mean, that's where the problem seems to have lied. Factionalism within those who, in fact, have very similar rhetoric as you do about the interests of the people, about changing this country to make it better, inclusive, whatever, right? So shouldn't the anger or questions be about why is it this elite, with the kind of rhetoric they have, then pursue what seems to be a very self-interested politics?
I seriously don't know how to address that question, because it's always easy to say that only Azmin and the gang, are orchestrating this whole thing, and now they're like, oh, okay, the game has changed. But who can we trust?
Okay.
A lot of things have been kept secret. So I don't know. They're not being transparent, for example. So I can't even make conclusive arguments, for example,
but
understanding what's going on.
You are on the ground, you talk to people, you were part of this demonstration yesterday. What do you think are some of the competing narratives that are shaping people's understanding of this current crisis? How are people understanding it?
People feel that the people's mandate has been betrayed. They feel like old politics is going to come back. They're very afraid that there's always that possibility that the current government or the interim government or the future government would accommodate people who would advance rhetoric that are racist, that are divisive. People feel the fear. Even before we started with that event yesterday, the protests, even my own friends messaged me and said, I don't think I'm going because I'm scared. People say that someone would stage a riot. And for me, I was like, wow, the fear is real. But who's addressing this fear? Who's creating this fear? I want to know that. And these leaders of ours do not provide any answers to that question.
I want to ask you,
that's why people we have to come together, do something, and then maybe strengthen this movement and tell the government or the leaders to listen to us and explain what's going on and stop trying to seize power from the people.
Okay, very quick answer from you. When you look around, our institutions are still working. We have no civil strife, or we have had no violence. There's a process in place now. The palace is guided by the Constitution. Don't those facts give you hope that actually we are evolving politically?
Things could change. Things have been changing rapidly for the past 3 days. So even now, I think a lot of people are arguing on Twitter, on Facebook, what's going to happen to the PH manifesto? Is it going to stand? So some people have burned the manifesto because they feel like, oh, it's gone, it's a gone case. But who is explaining this to the people? So yeah, how are we going to make you accountable? What are we going to hold on to? I don't have the answer because they're not giving me the answer. They're not giving us the answer.
Okay, Father, we're going to take a quick break and come back and continue this conversation with you a little bit later in the show. But first, after this, we're going to take a look at the media's role in shaping the narrative in the past few days. We'll be back with more on Consider This, so don't go anywhere.
All right.
Welcome back to this special edition of Consider This. Melisa, Idris here with Sharaad, Kuttan. We are reconsidering what we understand of the current political developments tonight. Joining us on the line now, we have Gayatri Venkiteswaran, Assistant Professor at University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Gaya, thank you so much for joining us right now. I want to take a quick look at the media. The media is shaping how people understand the current crisis, but now we know that Sunday's reporting included much that was simply untrue. Do you think, Gaya, this is just the nature of this crisis, or is there something in the structure of the media in Malaysia that allows for this kind of reporting?
Good evening, Melisa and Sharaad. I'm not so sure that we can conclude the reporting has been sort of untrue. I mean, clearly the stories have actually taken on from, I would say, months of rumors of different things happening in the different political parties. Of course, we can argue about the specifics that were put out by selected media, but I think that there's a willing, in the sense that there is a willing audience to want to know what is happening, because of the fact that a lot of things have been happening behind the scenes, behind the door, and people wanting to know what the future of the coalition is going to be. So I think that maybe we are being a little bit too tough on the media, because this is a very, I think it's a very interesting situation, because we are faced with I think for the first time, where you've had this very different sort of shift in government, and the media has yet to, I think, really realign what its functions, what its current position is. So there's still a lot of adjustments that's happening, and then we are faced with this crisis. This is probably the first, big crisis, right, since the 2018 elections. So I think this is where a lot of things are being tested. The institutions are being tested, the coalitions are being tested, the opposition also is being tested, and so is the media. I think that the reporting has actually reflected quite a lot of uncertainties that people have been talking about. I would say that yeah, maybe I think we might be a little bit too tough on some of the media by concluding that, yeah.
Well, I like what you said, Gaya, about, all these institutions being tested, the media also being tested. But I'm just wondering whether this is the nature of Malaysian politics and Malaysian journalism. There was a lot of reporting using sources and anonymous sources, anonymous quotes, anonymous numbers, so you don't know where these numbers came from. And I'm also wondering whether, because of this new openness that we have in Malaysia Baru or in the media, whether there was a danger of some of the media playing into the narratives of certain parties, certain quarters.
Sure. I think it's not new. I think we have definitely seen it in the past. It is unfortunately a practice, because for a long time we've seen the way in which media responds to a lot of official and sort of political cues, and it's been dubbed as a cue journalism in that sense. So media responds to the kind of developments that happen in the political scene. So it is not new. I think what we used to see before is the sort of internal conflicts within the then ruling coalition, which is also reflected and which formed the basis of a lot of stories that were reported in the past. So, when MCA had its crisis, of course, the media went to town with it when it was part of the ruling coalition. Every time UMNO had its internal crisis, different factions would actually feed information to the media. I think there is indeed a problem where you can say, to a large extent, this agenda is being set by those who might want to gain a certain kind of visibility or to push a certain agenda. Clearly, that is an issue, and I think that's a valid question to ask also to the media, whether the media wants to remain in that position where you don't shape it. So your earlier question about whether you're shaping, whether the media is shaping, I think a lot of this is shaped by people who understand the way in which the media work and take advantage of that. So it's not new. I however, think that given the fact that we have this opportunity to change a lot of things, it's very unfortunate that we are still seeing, the kind of politicians shaping and feeding information. But I think also that maybe we want to also consider how, with or without the media reporting, there's a lot of information also already out there. So people are already looking at what is happening through the social media, through the interactions. Politicians are speaking to the media, even when their whips are telling them don't speak. They are still speaking to the media. So I think there's a bit of understanding that needs to go on, but also maybe being critical of the sources who are actually putting out the information.
So you're looking at the public also taking some responsibility for how they understand what's going on and how they read as well. They have to read critically. What, Gaia, do you think is going to be lost if we don't have a reform agenda going forward, especially with media reforms? Because one of the things that was talked about, I think, in the lead up to this particular crisis was a media council and so on and so forth. Are we in danger of losing the dividends, at least in terms of media reforms? Well,
I think we are facing the danger of losing a lot of the momentum when it comes to reforms. But, with or without the kind of concrete plans, if we, just to come to your question about the public as well as the media, yes, the public does have, it is also our responsibility in terms of how we're getting information. But this is a point where, I think a lot of people are also questioning how their mandates are being exercised, how it is being reflected, how it's being represented. I think people are questioning also for the first time because, when it happened in the past, people didn't make this kind of noise. And I think it's a great thing to see people wanting to question their MPs and the parties and trying to understand the system a lot more. So that's a good sign. But also to be very careful where the information is coming from. And I think this is, we've been talking a lot about, when it comes to the health issues and other political issues, we also have some responsibility. But on the reform agenda, I do think that, we will, of course, see, some kind of slowing down if all this realignment takes much longer, if at all there's a snap election. So all of those processes will of course, be affected. Talks about the kind of unity government now that we've not really had that experience. So we don't know what that can actually lead to. But I would say, coming back to the media, really, I think, this can be an opportunity. And looking at the stories that are out there, I mean, I would ask you, do you think your colleagues are doing a good job? I think you would say probably yes. I think we need to also give the room to journalists who want to maybe exercise some of their rights, their freedoms that they've got. And I think we need to give that room also to see whether they can come up with, new kinds of stories. There's a lot more explanations going on the constitutionalities, analysis. So I do see some positive, actually, spaces and writings or at least publications, yeah.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Gaia, for joining us tonight and sharing those insights. We're going to take a quick break and be back with more on Consider This, so stay tuned. The media and conversations. Thank you for staying with us tonight on this special edition of Consider This with me, Melisa Idris, as well as my colleague Sharaad Kuttan. We are joined, of course, in the studio by Fadia Nadwa Fikri, lawyer and activist. She was our guest a bit earlier, talking about the peaceful gathering yesterday, which was leaderless, and it was called Demokrasi Mati, Ayuh Turun ke Jalan, Democracy is Dead, Let's Go to the Streets.
I wonder if any protest is truly leaderless. I mean, you're clearly an influencer.
How does it come together?
And I asked you this in all honesty. I mean, you, like many activists, you know, educate people, you give them a vocabulary, you give them theories of democratic change, you give them theories of what a good governance might be. So I want to ask you, I mean, in shaping that, what's your sense of people's literacy, political literacy in Malaysia? We've had 20 months of a new government. How do you rate our political literacy?
Okay, I was raised as an activist by street protest. So I learn about democracy, I learn about reclaiming your rights, understanding what freedom means from street protest. Because I think a lot of people still feel, what's the point of going to the street? Even for yesterday's protest, some people said that it's pointless, nobody's going to listen to us. But at the same time, people were asking, aren't we going to do anything about it? What about Bersih? What about other organizations? Are we going to call a rally? And somehow people feel it's very urgent. Somebody has to call the shot. So for me, I feel like we are in a crisis. If we don't do something, if the people don't reclaim the space to say that, hey, we are also part of this conversation, we want to be addressed and we want you to listen to what we have to say, then they will be forgotten, the people.
Right.
So I think, and a lot of people still don't understand, you know, how important it is for them to be out there to reclaim their voices, to reclaim the space. The police were there, like heavy presence of police officers, like maybe 30 of them, and we're not that big. But a lot of people feel, oh, why? What's going on? And they tried to stop us, you know, and also this rumor going around saying that somebody is going to come and create chaos. But I felt motivated when I saw people still turned up. People said after we concluded the whole event, are we doing this every day? Should we come back? Because we want to talk about these issues, because they feel like they're not being heard.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, how are you telling them? You know, you said that this is all part of political literacy or part of the pro-democracy understanding education, right? So, so what is it that you're telling people to do? Is it take to the streets? Is it go to the polls? Are you asking for polls to be held?
I'm trying to get the people to understand that when we talk about politics, it's not just about the political elite. It's about them against us, the people. It's about us checking their power. Because when we talk about checks and balances, we always talk about the opposition. And then, for example, before this whole crisis, UMNO is the opposition. That is the kind of is that the kind of opposition that we want? I mean, we should ask that question, right? So UMNO will never, ever, ever side with the people. And
well, I mean, okay, let's be fair to UMNO. UMNO got millions of votes, right? Regardless of how you might feel about individuals within that you know, configuration, they had millions of votes. PAS had millions of votes. If there were somebody who could claim to speak on behalf of the people, or at least millions of people, it would be them. Isn't that fair to say?
I think it's about reclaiming the narrative that speaks about universal values, about justice, about freedom. When we talk about racism, can they say now publicly, openly, that racism is fine? They will not say that, but they will do it surreptitiously. Yeah, they're not going to do it, you know, in front of everybody, but they're going to be subtle about it. So I think it's about that contestation. That contestation is ongoing. So that's why I feel people have to seize that moment and try to push the narrative to be out there.
Should we actually stop talking about the people, the riot, this concept as if it was a block, it is an abstraction, isn't it? Should we disaggregate? I mean, there's some Malaysians who want policies that are inclusive, there's some Malaysians who don't want, who cling to identity and community in ways that you might think is undemocratic, not particularly progressive or reactionary. Shouldn't they all have a space to speak?
Yes, of course, but if you are advocating for something that is racist, that is sexist, that is classist, for example, should you be given that space, for example? You already have that space everywhere. For example, you are funded. Let's talk about ISMA. Yeah, they're like properly funded. They get to go to public universities to talk about their ideas. But what about people like us? People who want to talk about values that we can use to unite instead of divide. People like us won't have that kind of space. I'm glad that I'm given this space today, but to a lot of people, they feel like we need to go somewhere. Even the media, for example, they just focus on what's going on with the political elite. They don't talk about issues that really affect the people while this crisis is unfolding. For example, the fear, that someone says that, a riot is going to happen. Who's focusing on that? Who's talking about that? And this morning, the UM graduate, Wong Yan-ke, was charged in court for protesting against his racist VC during his convocation ceremony. No one talked about that. And also, a bunch of Orang Asli activists marched to the Selangor MB office. Who was talking about that today?
Good point.
We should be pointing at people who are being affected by what's going on in this country. And yeah, we need to hear their voice. We need to give more space to them. And we want people who are scheming and plotting right now to be accountable to them and answer and address their plight.
All right, well said. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have on the show today, Fadia. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. That's all the time we have on this episode of Consider This. Now, our colleagues on the news desk will be bringing you all the latest updates as this political situation develops. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.